It was a perfect Los Angeles day. A gentle breeze floated in from the south on that 72-degree Sunday as I walked with my father up what seemed like a mountain. I remember the slight wafting aroma of hot dogs and french fries as we approached, and I could feel the rumble of the ground and hear the bustling crowd as we presented our tickets. I, as so many kids before me, knew the significance of my first live game and was every bit convinced that life would never be the same again. And in many ways, I was right. I've been rooting for the Dodgers for as long as I can remember, and that day, engraved forever in my mind, was the day I cemented my history as a Dodger fan. What I did not realize, however, was the lasting impact this day would have for a father and his son. That day, my dad and I started a conversation that in many ways will never end. A conversation that would help explain the many mysteries of life. One that provided help for my dad to connect and open a channel to impart his fatherly wisdom through. Today I'm going to be sharing that conversation with you. The one about my family. The one about understanding things outside of the norm, and how my admiration and love grew for my dad that day. The conversation about my family always begins the same way: hard work, dedication, and no complaining. As is the story for many immigrant families like mine. My father from Iran, my mother from Mexico, and my three older brothers. We lived the mantra of our story in everyday life. For us kids, that meant working hard to get good grades, always being respectful, and always taking care of our responsibilities. For our parents, that meant long hours of work in factories, not for lack of qualification, but because they had yet to master the language of their new home. Acculturation to the nation must have been hard for my parents, as immigration and acculturation are disorganizing and reorganizing experiences, necessitating alterations of social identity and self-image. My father, a naval engineer in Iran, and my mom, a college graduate of administrative assistant in Mexico, would never complain about it being unfair, but instead would find refuge in their family. After all, we were the reason why they came to America, to build a better life for their family, and though they barely made enough to pay the bills, they would always say, "Enough is enough for me." My father would always make time to come to my school events and Little League games, and when they were giving away free tickets to a Dodger game, he jumped at the opportunity to take me. That my father would pick a sporting event to facilitate a relationship with his son was no surprise. My dad had played soccer on an international level for Iran prior to his immigration to the U.S., and having unsuccessfully attempted to spark my interest in soccer, he looked for a new avenue. Although only 1 in every 200 baseball senior players, or about 5%, get drafted, my dad never expected my desire would become a professional ambition. However, baseball would be that avenue of communication, and though he had never had an interest in the game prior to my birth, he noticed the sparkle in my eye whenever I would watch or play in a baseball game. He saw what the game was and how he could use it to help teach me about life, and he took that opportunity to connect with me. When we arrived at our seats, with our hand-packed sandwiches and the small bottles of water we smuggled in, I noticed that the other kids had Dodger dogs and sodas. I asked my father why we had to bring our own food and could not just be normal like the rest of the kids and their fathers. His response never changing: "These sandwiches are better. They were made with love by your mother, and they are made just the way you like. You should be happy, because not every child has food to eat." A little much for an 11-year-old kid, but the lasting lesson was there. We do not always have what we want, but we should be happy that we have what we need. My dad very well could have paid the cost of buying an overpriced hot dog and soda, but he knew what that extra money was. It was the extra hours he spent working to provide for us. He wanted to teach me to value what we have and to look beyond what we want, for at the end of the day, we were doing exactly what we wanted, and that was watching the game. Baseball game was exciting, as the Dodgers would score, and the Mets would respond to tie a couple of times, and as the game progressed, my dad began to loosen up and was engaging in behaviors that I had never seen before from him. He was actively conversing with those adults around us, asking questions, cracking jokes, and having fun. This was not the man I was accustomed to. Sure, he would engage with his family, but his schedule left little time for fraternizing with the boys or going to a local bar. It was strangely gratifying to see my dad engage with other people outside of the household, and the crowd confirmed what I felt about my dad and his charismatic personality, with his funny jokes and ability to relate with people on a deep levels while never making you feel uncomfortable. I still remember the way the guys around us were laughing and the look of fun on my dad's eyes as we enjoyed the game. As the Mets tied the game in the top half of the eighth, The Dodgers looked to mount one final stand in the bottom half of the inning. With the bases loaded, a relative unknown Rick Parker stepped to the plate to deliver a ground ball right to the pitcher. All hope seemed lost until relief pitcher Jerry Dipoto threw the ball over the catcher's head to the crescendo of Dodger cheers. 2 runs would score in what would be the deciding play of the game. My dad cheered, high-fived other fans, and hugged his son. That perfect Los Angeles Sunday will live forever in my mind, not only because it was my first Dodger game, but because of the conversation that game started for me and my dad. I'll never forget the look of happiness, excitement, and love my dad had on his eyes that day. It's the way I'll always remember him, as he passed away 5 years later. But the conversation never ended. It instead was a way for me to process his passing and to realize our conversation would never end as long as this son never forgets the smell of hot dogs and fries, the feeling of the ground shake, the roar of the crowd, or that a moment like this can change the history for a son and his father forever.